All right, folks. So it's Jake Tuber here with Endeavorun. I'm live online right now with Peter Bromka, aka Bromka. When it comes to sports, there are a few folks who just go by one name. There's Ronaldo, maybe Lydiard, maybe Kipchoge, and then Bromka in our sport. And so I'm excited that Peter's here. You guys probably have heard of Peter if you follow track and field on Twitter, if you're a reader of stuff that's put out in the ether sphere. Peter's a prominent writer. He's about as serious as you can get for an amateur, as he's described himself to me. And we're talking with him today for the same reason he's been on a whirlwind tour the past week, which is that after having publicly been out there talking about chasing the Olympic trials men's B standard, which is 2:19 flat for the marathon, Peter chronicled his journey quite publicly, and along with his teammates at Bowerman Elite, has really put it all out there and came up 2 seconds short at CIM, which
I'm laughing through the pain.
Laughing through the pain. We're going to talk about that in a bit. We're going to talk certainly about what that experience was like and, you know, some of the basic reflection. But I really wanted to talk with Peter, and I want to talk with you today, Peter, about what it's been like since that experience and what the journey has been like since you've been talking to so many podcasts and people all over the internet who have maybe followed you or have been adjacent to you, have reached out to you and been inspired by you, and what this last week has done in the beginning of the growth as you look forward in your career and life as a runner. That's what I'm really interested in getting into today. So before we get into that, though, let me just back up and ask you to give us the 2-minute bio of yourself. I know you're probably an expert at running through this at this point. So tell us like how you came into running, a little bit about your career and history.
Yeah, thanks for having me. You know, it's interesting because when people talk to me about their running and how they got into it and their journey to running, I'm always really very fascinated because I grew up in a running household where my dad is so, he was part of running back in the 70s. So he, you know, in the golden era of running in America, and I've written an essay about this, he wasn't fast, but he would just do marathons and he would do the local road races. And, you know, he would be at the races when like Joni was, you know, walking down the hall, and then there's Bill Rogers, and then, you know, Frank is over here. And it was a lot simpler of a scene back then. And it was Americans were figuring out what they were capable of. And they were also dominating the world scene, and like all this exciting times. And all the meanwhile, my dad was just following the sport, geeking out on the sport, cataloging things. And so I grew up in a household where, you know, growing up in the 80s and 90s, I was all about soccer. But we learned about running just because that's what we thought everyone, you know, learned about. So it's actually been a pretty amazing, as an aside, like now that YouTube exists, and all these races that my dad spent our formative years telling us about are online. Like if you have my dad as your dad, you just get random YouTube links to like, this is, you know, the Dave Waddle race that I know you've seen.
It was always Dave Waddle with our parents, wasn't it? It was always like, you wouldn't believe this guy ran with a hat and he just came out of nowhere. Yeah, I can relate.
But also like the 90s, I mean, we could go forever, but like I'll walk into a room. I'm fortunate. I live in Portland, Oregon. I grew up here and I lived in Boston where I'm being a little roundabout, but I wanted to run Division III. And because I had figured out that was probably, I'd grown up an athlete and loved doing sports. And that was probably the best shot I had at continuing to do sports. And I was a fine soccer player for small schools division, but I was doing better at running in high school. And I was like, you know, there's a passion of mine. And, you know, if you've been able to grant 15-year-old me like infinite skill in one or the other, I think I would like be playing in the MLS still. And which is so weird to say, right? Because I write about running. It means so much to me. And I don't follow soccer that closely anymore, but it's like where you focus your energy over your life. So yeah, I ended up running in the NESCAC, New England Small College Athletic Conference. And it was super fun because I was definitely there to be, you know, you go to college, if you go to these schools and you got to work hard in the classroom, but then the experience really is defined by the time you spend with your teammates and all the meets you go to. And it was just, I was so fortunate. We ended up being lucky to have a collection of guys over the years who we ended up winning our first cross country conference title and regional title when I was a senior. And that was super meaningful because this stuff has been around for decades and your school's never won. We were talking a little bit before we started about coaches. Like, I'll never forget the sound of my coach's voice crack as after the NESCAC conference title, and we had just won him his first conference title, you know, and he'd been coaching for decades. So you're like, that's super meaningful. And so then I ran through college, and I spent most of my college career super burnt out. And that's my advice to people who are newer to running is like, so the thing is, super easy to break yourself as a runner. It's like almost the simplest thing you can do. And as a new runner, you're like, I got to want it. You know, I got to really want it. And I'm like, yep. And if you want it, I'm going to guess, you know, I could lay out a choose your own adventure of ways you're going to, you know, break yourself. And in my case, I have always had like, I think as growing up a soccer player, like my hips were like super, like kind of always out of alignment. I had kind of like bow-legged, and I was just always sort of banged up with my legs and then super tired. So in hindsight, I was able to see that the best season I ever had was the season after the season I had mono. So I missed a whole cross country season. And then that indoor season, I was tearing it up, you know.
Wow.
Shocker. You're like a little bit rested and you build strength more slowly, and you're not really competing much. And then there you go. So it went really well. So, but I finished college, you know, feeling like all the worldview I had was like, that was the fastest you'd ever be, because you'd spent so much time doing it. You were around all these fast guys, and now you had to transition to real life, figure out what job you're going to do, get a job, like figure out what it means to be in the working world. And so my buddies and I, who I was fortunate to live with some friends as roommates, and we'd still run a little bit, but not that focused. You're not like, you're then relearning like how to cook for yourself, how to take care of yourself. You're suddenly like of age that you can go out to bars with friends. And so I just like spent my 20s running, maybe 20, 25 miles a week, a couple days a week, but not really all that serious. I ran the Boston Marathon as a charity runner. I was like the last guy to start the 2005 Boston Marathon. And I was there like at the start line in Hopkinton, and they were like, you got to go across the line. Like, and I was like, there's 30,000 people in front of me. I just want them to space out. And they're like, you got to go. So then I ran through, and I was lucky enough, you know, fortunate to qualify for the next year, and I ran 2:56, and then I was like, that was good. You know, you're never going to get a more exciting marathon than the Boston Marathon. And so I felt like that was it, and just pretty much settled into 6, 7, 8 years of like casual running. And then I moved to Portland, Oregon in 2013 and started running more frequently, just because there was people here and people were like, oh, you want to go for a run? It's like a social thing. So I was enjoying it, and then the Boston bombings happened. And I was like, man, I know it's been 7 years since I ran Boston, but we got to be there next year. Like, that's going to be the year to be there. And it was. We were there. I ran 2:41, which was like a nice run for me that day. It was PR. And as I finished, like Meb was standing there with the reporters all around him, and he had the gold crown on. I'm like, turning to my buddy, like, why does Meb have a gold crown? Holy shit, Meb has a gold crown. They only make one of those. It was so cool. And I always say like if that had been the last scene in my running life, that would have been enough. This person, like, I'll never forget, they like turned and pointed a camera at me and were like, what does today mean? And I just burst into tears and like couldn't make any sense, because, you know, you just feel, and again, it's like a lot of people experience a lot of hardship, but I think the running community really felt like personally offended by someone, you know, blowing us up. And it wasn't me at all. I was 3,000 miles away, but it was just really scary on a number of levels. And I think there was a lot of pride, and we're, you know, like Meb said, you know, like we're all Boston strong together. So that was 2014. And it's really been this, like, I talk to people about their goals a lot, and I'm like, it doesn't have to be meaningful to anyone else but you. You just need to find something that fires you up. You could be like, I'm all about the 15K in my, you know, in my local town hall. And I'm like, that's awesome. That's your Olympics, and get amped for it. I have buddies who are fast, and they're like, you probably heard me, like I have friends who are like, I really want to PR at the half marathon. And I'm like, dude, if that fires you up and that'll get you out of bed in the morning, that's what you're all about. Marathoning has been that for me. You know, like I really wanted to be a good miler in high school and was mediocre, really wanted to be a good 5K runner in college and was like less than mediocre. Just like not slow because it's not about times, but like I didn't impact like conference, you know.
Sure.
My favorite is like, I've always been this, again, my name Bromka is Polish. It was shortened, I think, like Ellis Island style. So it like, there's not a lot of Bromkas out there. And a guy kept a running log. This is like super early days, but it was like 2004 indoor meet. And there was a guy from MIT who kept a running log every day of every run. And he gave a recap of like the indoor conference 3,000 meters. And he's like, then I started slipping back, and then Bromka passed me. Bromka! Exclamation point. Like I was the low watermark.
You were the guy. You were the Mendoza line for
Yeah.
running that year. That's
He's like, I gotta make it back. So anyways.
He got Bromka, basically.
Yeah, he got Bromka. And I was like, booyah, gotcha. But to find that the marathon just has so many chapters and it has so many variables to work on. And that really captured my imagination, because there's just always these things to work on. Whereas like, technically there's stuff to work on in the 5K, but like, if you are close to your ability, like it's about running more horrible speed workouts and then hurting more. Whereas I was like, I mean, I could talk to you for 20 minutes about the different diversity of long run styles that we do for body adaptation and all these things that allow us to get better. When I say us, I mean my teammates and I. So I like had been on this progression of getting better, faster each marathon, because I swore to myself, like, you spent all of your years in college burnt out and injured, and it just was horrible. So if you're going to do this, like, your wife's going to kill you if you are like that injured runner guy too often. You know, we all get digged up. But I've really tried to stick to like listening to my body and staying in a zone where I'm getting better, but I'm not lying to myself and like breaking my legs, or like I get a lot of soft tissue, you know, dinged up. And what I've found is, I could talk to you about this again for hours, is my hips get out of alignment, my legs get out of alignment, and then I would get shin pain, which wasn't really like, why would I get shin pain, except for, oh, your leg is out of alignment, so the force is being transferred and it's like hitting your shin bone. Whereas when I'm properly in alignment, that doesn't happen. So yeah, it's just been a constant like rope tow of like, what's the next goal? What's the next goal? So I ran Boston 14, and then someone got me a bib to Chicago 14. And my buddy was like, I always felt like I should run faster than 6-minute pace for the marathon. And I was like, oh, really? That seems kind of hard. Maybe I'll try to do that. And I was, you know, I say lucky, but because it feels like I didn't plan on it that much, but I was able to do that. And then it's on to the next thing. So I ran New York. Again, I'm a total emotional running junkie. So I'm like, what's the next big stage that's going to rock my socks off? And it's like, oh, New York City, you know, it's going to be nutty. And it was super fun. I ran 2:34. And then in the spring, people were like, all right, when are you gonna stop screwing around? And I'm like, stop screwing around, like, I'm progressing, this is going well. And they're like, because as an amateur marathoner for men, the 2:30 barrier is like this elusive, like, are you over or under? And I didn't know that until it became really clear to me, because people started being like, when are you gonna go for it? When are you gonna go for it? So I went for it in 2016. It was an Olympic year right after the trials. And so like the field was a little bit thinner, and I was just moving through people, and I ended up finishing 2:29 and finished 10th American, and was just like, again, if that was the end of my running career, I'd been like, this is the best day ever. There's a photo of me like holding my wife in the air after the line, and it's just like the best. And I wrote a whole essay about it called 9,000 Seconds, because it was all about 2:30 is 9,000 seconds, and it was about like how I had to move from like people asking me about this goal to me internalizing this goal to me being like, I'm putting out this goal. So before I put out the OTQ, people were like, how are you able to put that out there and live with it out there in the open? And I'm like, I don't know. I've done it before, and I like at a lesser goal, and I've seen how it doesn't really matter, and it's kind of fun to. And I'm not. I should say, like, I find that my approach to marathoning is like straight up, look yourself in the mirror and figure out what you're capable of. I find that's like pretty much building block 1A of being a good marathoner is like knowing where you're at and really understanding what you're capable of. And I always say, like, I wrote this whole essay, The Marathon Doesn't Know You Anything, because I felt like there's a lot of people like aspiring to be good marathoners, and good can be so relative. I really say this again. I have a piece I want to write about like the number of times I've been hit up with, like, hey man, I'm not at your level. And I'm like, listen, like, I am not at so many people's levels. And
Right.
so no need to say the time element, but just throwing it out there and saying like, it's about body awareness and knowing where you're at, and therefore what a meaningful goal would be that you can really stare down with confidence, because it's going to get hard. And if you're like aiming way over your skis, so, shocker, you're going to put yourself into like massive debt. And so I had put it out there also because, like, I always say, like, I'll be the first to know if I'm going to fail. I'll know on the day, and I'll face it. And even by the time I finish, like, I'll have been aware. And so it allowed me to get excited about a goal and sort of say, like, I think I can get after this goal. And because I've only ever stated goals that are within like a ballpark of what I can achieve, I don't ever feel like I'm putting myself out there too much that I'm going to get shit talked to, or like, that it's inappropriate. It's more just to say like, no, I think I'm going to get after this. So, yeah, like from 229 to 228 the following year, and then ran 223 at CIM 2 years ago. And that's when people started to say like, okay, whoa, you're like within like maybe not spitting distance. What is it? Like hollering distance of the OTQ of
Your
220.
seconds per
Yeah.
mile, right? Like there's a
Well, it's a little bit of the bitch of it.
yeah.
When you run 529 pace,
524 pace, 520 pace, 518 pace is
so like,
absurdly different. Yep.
yeah, you're like 518 pace. And that's where like you're even like, all right, 520s. And then you're like, oh, just for the record, 520s will not get you an invite to the trials, like 518 pace. And as I proved last week, it's the tenths matter. So it's even less.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's this thing of, it's been a constant evolution of, okay, cool. That we kind of like checked off that pace. And so so it's the same behavior again and again, being like, okay, I ran 6-minute pace. What would it look like to run in the mid 550s? What would it look like to run 542s, which is 230? And so the behavior of just like going into the next cycle and trying on a new pace. Again, we have like a series of workouts. When I say we, the BTC Elite is a group of guys and girls who, many of them train at Nike, but not all, Portland based, obviously Bowerman. The Bowerman Track Club is a professional club at Nike, and they are funded by Nike. And then also there's a youth program, which is pretty awesome. There's hundreds and hundreds of kids of all different ages in the Junior Olympic categories, and they wear the Bowerman singlet really proudly, as a feeder towards like high school and then college. We're in this middle ground where, like a lot of clubs, I don't think we're that much different than other clubs, except for that we're pretty small. And it's honestly fairly organic in that we don't get funding really from Nike. Occasionally, because we're like part of the ecosystem, we get a product here or there, like a pair of shoes they gave us recently, because teams at Nike are like, oh, we want to give out some of these shoes that we are super proud of. Who might enjoy them? Oh, this team over here that really runs a lot. But we get emails from people all the time, like, hey, how do I join you? Are there entry standards? Or there this or that? And we're like, and a teammate of mine who's fairly new was like, yeah, man, like I just told people like I emailed you guys and that's how I got on. I'm like, yeah, you emailed us and then you showed up at 6:15 on Wednesday and then you showed up at 8:30 on Saturday
Right.
and then you did it again and again and again. And I'm like, dude, you're the outlier. Like very few people come and really slip into that routine and really put in the work. And so, we field emails and we don't turn people away so much as we say like, yeah, you're welcome to join. And in the best way possible, there's ways of running track workouts and long run workouts where, as long as you're willing to hurt, like we make it work with people. Yep. Yeah. So, that's all to say that like that all led up to what you mentioned, like a year and a half ago, I wrote a piece. Again, I put a lot of pieces online on medium.com. I have a website, peterbromka.com, where I really came about because people were asking me, like, where can I find your writing? And it's like, the internet is just so confusing. There's so much stuff out there that I put it all on the one page, like here. So when your mom asks like, where's that piece again? I'm like able to point her to it.
You would be amazed the amount of times my mom asks about your latest writing, actually.
Yeah,
constant topic of conversation.
This is me and the same friend. Yeah. My mom asked, sorry.
Gotcha. Not a
problem. So I wrote a piece called Burn the Boat, which was, I'm always looking for like overly dramatic ways to describe the same topic that I love, which is
go all in, burn the boat. No turning around. Yeah.
Like no turning around. We're going for it. Because I needed to lay out publicly that we were going for this goal of 219, 218.59, and that it was going to, and then it was just sort of like spelling out what I thought it would take. Honestly, I think I've had some really wonderful reactions to pieces I've written, and I've been blown away by people's responses to different pieces over the years. And that one, people always come back to, and I'm like, that's so cool, because I thought it had to do with me and my teammates, but it clearly has to do with people seeing their own goals through it and being inspired by like, oh, okay, here's a blueprint for both how you might think through a goal, how you might translate it to a series of intermediate actions, and then how you might just like, I don't know if I'll never know if I could be this like public about stuff 20 years ago when I was 18 or 22. Because I think like many runners, I had like goal times up on my dorm room wall, just like, here's my goal. And that stuff's super meaningful. But like, and I have another piece I'm trying to write, which is around like, people will say to me like, hey, you deal with the haters well. And I'm like, do you understand like how hilarious I find like any mention of me in the,
18-year-old you would not have imagined you're getting talked about on Let's Run threads about, oh man, if he'd only shaved a second, he'd be at Olympic trials.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing about the beautiful thing about running though, is like, so honestly, I grew up in the era of Eminem, and like Eminem diffused everyone's, disarmed everyone around him by being the first person to talk shit about himself. And so I always think of it like, no one can hurt your feelings if you're honest with yourself about how things are. And people are they get super upset about things that they're secretly like very self-conscious about.
Yeah, there's a lot of projective identification that happens. Yeah. That is, I would find anonymous message boards and Twitter are particularly conducive to that coming out. But I mean, you mentioned something, Peter, that I think really resonates for a lot of folks, which is this idea that your Burn the Boat essay, it was substantively about you chasing this specific goal and your teammates. And it was a look at the life of, an elite, sub-elite group of folks who are really going after it and what their training is involved in. But, there's, it's the James Joyce quote, right? Mm-hmm. Of, in the particulars contain the universal. There's something about that experience of like, whatever that goal is for you, being confident enough to pick a stretch goal that's achievable, but still really hard, putting it out there so that you're accountable to yourself and others who you care about, and maybe even others who you don't care about, in a way that really makes it much more real. Yeah, it's not so much, to me, this idea of going all in and going for the goal. Burning the boat is not so much about constant energy and not looking back. It's about putting that goal out there so that you can't ever say, no, it was never really something I cared about. Because that is something that I think as runners, we get really good at doing, which is we have goals that we want to keep in the back of our mind. And if we don't talk about them at parties, if we don't bring them up to our running friends, when we don't get anywhere near there, we don't have to face a self-belief being of that of a failure. And so
Yeah.
there's an element of when I keep it to myself, no one can tell me I didn't achieve something. But burning the boat, yeah, it's about going all in to some extent. But I thought that the idea of putting it out there was much more the boat burning than the actual experience to get you from point A to point B.
That's interesting. See, I'm definitely a collaborative thinker. It's part of like the work I do is I like work with teams and think things through verbally and throw around ideas and get feedback. So, I mean, you've heard me, I realize I just did it twice here. It's like, I'll say there's a piece I want to write. Cause at this point I've written like 20 pieces online and I'll say to people like, there's a piece I'm noodling on, but I haven't figured out how to finish it or like how to land it. And I'll throw it out there. And then I think with that goal of maybe working with that person in that moment to think through something. And then also to start to hold myself accountable in a more casual way of like, I've stated that that is a piece that could be written. Let's get after it. The thing about the trials standard is like, it's captured people's imagination. I mean, the women's standard has been 245 for a little while, and it just went off like wildfire as other women are like, wait a second, I can do this. And there's not a lot of, in the short time frame that we've just had, like the 4-year cycle, it's not that Title IX has suddenly like crested exactly, although it helps. It's not as though like, but I wrote a piece called The Digital Runner about this weird intersection of Strava and Instagram and being like, wait a second, I can see this person's splits and I can see their life. And if, you know, if they're doing it, I can do this.
I think we saw in these 4 years the kind of the sort of buildup, if you will, the sort of visual metaphor that comes to mind is like the wave that's kind of crested in women's running, which is like, hang on, 245 is doable for someone who's got kids and has a job and does this. I just need to commit to, you know, if I'm a 3-hour marathoner or a 3:10 marathoner, if I really want to put in the next miles for 4 years, like I might be in the ballpark.
That's the thing.
Curious what you think about the difference though, because by any sort of biological sex-based calculus, 245 is a much more lenient standard than 219. You know, if the men's equivalent, and I think I actually tweeted something about this that we may have interacted about online, but you know, I personally would love to see, rather than folks overreacting and saying, well, look how many women are going to be at trials, this is silly, let's make the standard harder. I'd rather see the men's standard become more of the sort of time equivalent, which is about, to your point earlier, about 230. Yeah. Have you given that any thought? Had you put in the same energy and simply been wired biologically different, you'd be at the A standard. You know?
I think of the other way around, where if there's a piece I might try to write, I don't know who needs to hear it from a USATF perspective, but what I would love for 2024, and I have no idea if this has anything to do with me, is there to be thought to what do they want that event to be? Because I think what we've seen across all sorts of publications and all sorts of qualifiers is like there's a lot of stories that are capturing people's imagination. Now, I will say, as someone who's gone for the qualifier, there's a sleight of tongue for the casual fan that's like, wait, you're going for Tokyo? And I'm like, wait, easy. And you know, but there's very little downside to the swell of excitement around the races. So like, I know in a meaningful way, if the barrier wasn't 219, if let's say I had run 223.20 like 2 years ago and that qualified me, I don't know if I'd be a 219 marathoner. Like, I just don't know if I would have really, really buckled down, because I've trained harder in the last 2 years than I've ever trained in my life. Mm-hmm. And it's been wonderful. So like, you can't, if I never make it to the trials, I'm still a 219.02 marathoner. And that, like, because I love the sport so much, that means so much to me. And it means it's meaningful to less people. If I could just be like, OTQ, boom, it's like a better brand, which sure as hell would love to have that. But I can go both ways. And so I think at any time goal, you have this like pulling, and then you also have like a little bit of a disillusionment. Like I've worked closely with a couple women in Portland who they qualified and then they PR'd again. And then they started to think like, wait, could I break 240? I had a woman reach out to me. I won't name her name just so she doesn't feel embarrassed, but I needed to get her, she needed to be able to say, I don't know anyone who I can train with. And because she's such a kind woman, she didn't want to say that. But she reached out to me and she was like, essentially beating around the bush, asking, would I come and train with her on a few training runs?
This is Jordan Hesse you're talking about?
Jordan, I luckily have gotten by just a little bit, but it took a lot of work. She's so amazing. But it was just interesting. This woman didn't really want to say the obvious truth, which is she was faster than her girlfriends and she was faster than the guys she knows. And none of them could keep up with her in training runs. And so I was like, hey, I'd be happy to come and join you and run with you because I know what it looks like to train alone. And I know what it looks like to try to unlock a new pace in your mind. And so that's all I'd say is like, what I'd hope for the women who are OTQers is that's not the end. That they're super motivated by that next thing and that next barrier, or else it can feel really squishy. I mean, I know that as a guy who broke 2:30 3.5 years ago, there was a whole period. I wrote a piece called Why Faster, which I think is one of my favorite pieces because it's just like, these numbers are meaningless. And the moment, I have this metaphor that the marathon majors felt like Christmas, the end of Christmas morning, where you look back and you're like, oh, it was so fun when I hadn't opened up those presents. And now I have. So people are like, you want to go back to Chicago? And I'm like, yeah, I want to say I want to go back to Chicago, but I don't know.
I hear you.
So you can't. And so that's where when people say, I would never talk trash about anyone who wants to go for an OTQ. But what I would say is, if you want to, it's going to be better if you really love the lifestyle and if you give yourself a couple of years, because you're going to accomplish more things than if you just say, I'm going to try to do that in 9 months.
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of athletes have said this. I know one person, this is an odd reference, but I know who said this explicitly. And for some reason, when he said it, it stuck with me, maybe because I didn't expect him to say it, but Blake Griffin once talked about this idea of you have to fall in love with the process of becoming great for yourself. And the love has to come, obviously there's a very clear sort of, the journey is the destination tone to that kind of conversation. But I think falling in love with the process is something that you've clearly done and you've taken that to new heights. And you make a really interesting point, which is, if getting the OTQ, get into Atlanta this year or wherever OT trials are in 2024 is the goal, like that's amazing. But there's a, potential downside. Whereas if you really do love the sport, you could be limiting your sort of intrinsic benefit if you kind of just set that cap artificially. And I fully agree. Maybe that's a piece we could co-author in terms of the sport deciding, what they want it to be. I will give a quick teaser here and then we'll shift, because I know you and I as track and running nerds will go on this for hours, and our audience probably will not appreciate that. My sense is that road running in particular should take advantage of its very unique nature as a sport, in that you can add as many folks to the field as possible without in any way jeopardizing or compromising the competition for those who have a chance to win. Whereas you can't add more teams to the NBA. You can't just simply like throw more guys on the field or give more folks a chance to make the cup and something like this. But as long as you line up the slower guys behind the faster ones, and as long as the faster guys have access to their special porta potties before the race, I think running should lean into it. I mean, I think there's so much more excitement about the trials this year about running. There's more people who are going out there and just ripping a 5K because they see their friend who's chasing OTs, and I think that's great. It's healthy, and
I mean, to make it really real, really quickly. Like, I had a friend recently in the last week say, we were drinking beers, and he said, like, I need to tell you about the progression of my health metrics at my doctor's visit recently, and how much they've improved and how much healthier I am. It was another guy was there who's a runner, and he's like, just being around with you guys, he's very athletic and he does all sorts of things, but not running exactly. And he's like, having you guys as like life influences has made me see like living an active lifestyle can be really fun and really meaningful, and it's not just like a drag. And so, I mean, going from 2:19:40 to 2:19:02 is pretty cool, but like for a close friend to have like better health metrics and maybe a better life longevity is like so much more meaningful.
Yeah, that's really impressive. And I think it speaks a lot to your character that would be something that you would look as a metric for success, as opposed to just the time goals or maybe someone else who OTQ'd or something. So I hope that you're able to reflect on that. And I want to take that and obviously parlay that into a bit of a conversation about the actual OTQ experience. I actually don't want to focus too much on the race itself. We've heard that on other podcasts.
Yeah.
We know, for again, to recap for those who finished, he was chasing a 2:18:59 and ran a 2:19:02. Now, I will say, Bromka, in fairness to you, and this, I don't know if this is any consolation. I don't know if you've thought about this, but had you been running in the regular peg 35s and not the Vaporflies, that's like a 4:12 marathon equivalent. So I don't, you know what I mean? Like if we actually convert that for absurd shoe technology, you're actually ran like a 3:15. So I don't know if that makes you feel any better about it, but
my favorite joke about the Vaporflies was on Let's Run. Some guy goes, "Man, these things are getting so tall. The next one is just going to be 26 miles tall. Kipchoge
one step,
lean over." Just, boom.
I think the Alpha Flies gave him a couple inches there in those photos.
Yeah,
exactly. That's for sure. So you missed out. What has described to me from last Sunday to today? It's been about almost 10 days now. What's been the progression of your thought about the experience?
I mean, yeah, it's been so fascinating because there was the initial disappointment and really a bit of shock post of like just trying to make sense of that little margin because, you know, for instance, spent 2 years obsessing running 5:18 pace. Could I do it? Well, wait, I did it. But there's still margin within 5:18 and I still didn't hit the qualifier. But like I seriously doubted for the last 2 years whether I could run 5:18 pace. So it's this, it kind of feels like I'm stuck in a bubble, right? Mm-hmm. Because by some metrics, it was by the key metric, it was a failure. But to initially have people reach out. And then one thing I'd say is, as you can probably tell from this conversation, like I'm living a pretty good life. And I'm very, very, very fortunate and I'm privileged and all of these things. And so I had said to people who would listen, like, I'll be all right either way. I really will. And I'll be okay. And so I had people reach out in the first like 12 hours where I was like, oh, this person doesn't know me that well, or they're also projecting about how devastated they'd be because I'm not like inconsolable, you know, I'll be okay. And that's where it's like, it's hard because I've in the last week, I've come to accept that you can have parallel emotions that are very true.
To hold those two together is powerful. And I think that, I mean, it's funny you say that. I remember waking up that morning to check the CIM races and my wife says to me, Jake, who do you know that's running? And I was like, oh, Bromka's running. She was like, oh yeah. Like, how do you know him? I was like, yeah, we probably like chatted about running stuff online, you know, but I had something invested. I knew you would put yourself out there. I really wanted that for you. Yeah. And of course the time came over and I know the site was down and the app wasn't working. When I first saw it, it said 2:19:05. Yeah. And I actually texted your Bowerman compatriot, our mutual friend and Endeavorun pro, Kate. It was like, oh, I think Peter just missed it, but I don't know. The site's not working. I saw 19:02. I want to ask you about something. I want to put something out there about this idea of picking up a couple seconds here or there, because I think that, to me, I was thinking a lot about this, and I think maybe you're in the best position of anyone I could talk to throw this back in my face and say, Jake, you're an idiot. That doesn't make any sense. So I want you to tell me if that's the case. But I think that there was a lot of talk about this idea of, oh, could you have shaved a second here or a second there on the course? And yes, from a numerical standpoint, that's the case. But when you're running at pace, I mean, when you're within a 2-second window over 26.2 miles, there's no amount of mathematical precision that your mind could have done any better than it did. So in a certain sense, like, yeah, I guess you could have gone a little faster and hedged, but I say that for the first 25 miles. So this is my theorem, which is if you're looking at your watch and you're seeing 5:18, I'm where I want to be. I know I want to pick it up. You're executing your plan, and there's no way to project teleologically sort of space and time. It could be that, you know, what you could be seeing could be the result of a tangent that was not calculated. I mean, at that point, at that margin of error,
only thing I'll say, I would never want this to come off as an excuse. So let me lead it with like, it's not an excuse. You have to get the job done. It's on you. The women's standard, because men can run it, there are pacemakers that run. So there was these 3 awesome dudes that were
That's
like
right.
6'5", 6'6", that all ran 2:44:35. And I was so fatigued that I had lost track of the fact that our pacers, these 2 awesome dudes, were going to drop out at 18.
Gotcha.
So I know that it's like, you know, the effect of a tangent or this or that. But really meaningfully, like, you're so fatigued that the one thing I wish for, but don't begrudge anyone, is that all I was looking at on the road was like a bunch of dudes just cracked and like falling apart. And like, if you look at I went from 100th place to 111th place by 10K all the way down to 38th place. So I was passing people throughout. And again, except for 2 seconds, and even leaving it that close, like realistically, I should have been aiming for, 2:18:45 or
sure.
But I wish, if you had been like, this is NBC Olympics and there's a red line and you have to be in front of that, or someone said, well, here's an idea. What about a Tesla with a bunch of lasers on top? And I was like,
I've heard that before.
Yeah, I think I've heard that before. I got to give myself the benefit of the doubt. I think I would have found something if it had been like,
I certainly think if you could reduce your goal at any moment in the last 6.2 miles, especially to, I've got to be within 10 feet of this person or this moving target. All you have to do at that point is, you don't have to do a massive calculation about your pace and your time and the tangent and the weather and the fueling. It's just like, I'm locking into this person. That's why pacing works in long distance races. So I fully think that if you had a pacer, you probably would have run like 2:04, 2:05. For the full marathon.
I
think that would have been, if you had just had, Bekele or Kipchoge with you that whole time, you'd have just gone.
So that's the only thing that I'm like, I know that a coach, like if Jerry Schumacher was my coach, which I'm glad he's not, because he's a really tough coach and it's not my full-time job. I like don't always wish to be them. He'd be like, you lost focus. Like, you let yourself out of the bag of, you let yourself off the hook a little bit, and it's okay. That's
to your point, someone who was confidently and smoothly cruising 2:18:35 gives you something very different to focus on in a way that is much easier to maintain focus. And if you look at sort of sports psych, and I know one of our pros at Endeavorun, Addie Bracey, talks a lot about this in her sports psych work, about it's really a matter of focus. And if you think about performance as a matter of, mentally speaking, when you go off the rails, it's a matter of your focus being on the wrong thing. If you can reduce that line of sight to just a jersey 10 meters in front of you that's not wavering, that is a different ball game. So I think that's a totally valid point.
That's the hard part. And then what's crazy to me, and to be totally honest, I thought you might find this interesting, like, I'm still processing it, is I've had friends reach out and been like, what you did inspires me, like, beyond sport. I think it'll inspire people in your life for years to come. And I'm like, and I've had to text like 3 days later and be like, wait, I still don't know if I get it. Like, I'm the central player in a story, but I don't know if I understand what it means, because if I had run 3 seconds faster, well, I think what I've arrived at is like, I think it's easier to other the person who can qualify and say like, well, that person must be better than me. And that person
different species.
Different species. And the fact that I failed people, and I failed so publicly by talking about it, people are like, wow, he is human. And I'm like, what do you mean? Like,
well, I'll speak for myself, Peter. I certainly can't speak for others, but I will say what I found immediately empowering in many ways about your experience and the week or so since was not just that in failing for something that you've put yourself out there for publicly and doing it with humility is something that I think folks can relate to. Maybe not necessarily the humility part, but a lot of folks can relate to failing publicly. But I think putting yourself out there and doing that is relatable. But I think the thing that, to me, and I don't necessarily know if this is the case for others, that I find truly inspiring in many ways about your experience is the immediacy of your vocal resiliency.
Oh.
The sense in which right after the fact, the response was, yeah, I'm heartbroken, but my heart is so full. And the ability to immediately both hold, as you talked about, the duality of the negative emotion of having this goal and being so close to it, with also realizing that it also in many ways represents an incredible accomplishment that you yourself never would have maybe dreamed of years ago. It's still amazing progress. You're still not done. It's another chapter. I mean, you spoke earlier in our conversation today about, had my running life ended at this moment, at the end of Chicago, at the end of Boston, at the end of New York, it would have been I have a strong feeling that this is far from the last chapter you're going to write. So I think what I can sort of really attach to as a viewer, as a fan of yours, is not just sort of putting yourself out there, going for it and living with that, and how I admire your ability to do that, but the speed with which you seem to be able to put it in a thoughtful, contextual perspective and bounce back was something that I think, as much as the fast times or having a strong goal that you're public with, I think it's that ability to be humble and resilient so quickly is something that a lot of folks look to as a real impressive example. That's a thought I have.
I appreciate that. I mean, I've written a handful of these race reports at this point. Chicago, then 3 Bostons, 2 CIMs. So I've written these, and I haven't been able to write one about this race because it makes me want to throw up a little bit. And so using Instagram was just, I didn't get a lot of sleep last week because I just couldn't go to sleep, and I would sit there and just like write different stuff. And I was lucky enough to be followed by a friend of mine, Jody Bailey, who took photographs of the whole weekend. And so I had these amazing images, and then I just thought and then these snapshots would come to me, and that's what I would publish as a way to try to be truthful and try to share what I was going through. And there's this interesting, social media isn't reality, but I also say we're all making it up constantly and no one knows. So people would be back channel texting my friends, how's he actually doing? And they'd be like, oh no, what he saw him today and what he posted online was, what he was talking about, which I thought was interesting because it is I'm not here to put a front on anything. And again, I feel like if I was putting a front in any meaningful way that I knew about, then I would be self-conscious. And then if people were making fun of me online, then maybe I'd be pissed off about it. But I'm the idea that someone could post on Let's Run and it would have any impact on me, it just makes me laugh so hard because the proof is in the time. And then you literally can't make fun of me for missing the trial standard because I'm the first person who knew. So
Right.
that's the beauty. In sports like football or something, people were I saw the backside angle and he clearly could have caught it. He just didn't. I'm yeah, but this is running and I knew I was there and, no one, they can't make fun of me about my mileage because I know how much that I could only run as much mileage as I can. It's just it's in the essence of it that I find it so meaningful. And so that's where, the last week has been people reaching out to me and people the waves. Again, I've gotten a lot of messages that are this person wants to send you a message and you're oh, who is this person? And then they're hey, you accepted on Instagram, and they're hey, I don't usually do this, but I wanted you to know that I hope you're doing well. And again, a lot of them lead with hey, I'm definitely not at your level. And I'm whoa, please, no need for talking about being at one level or another, because that's truly not what it's about. And it's not I'm offended, but I'm just so you know, we're on this journey together, and it's just what this sport is about. I will say, I wanted to read this one to you. I posted, so I've gotten a lot of Strava followers recently, which is funny because my training right now is not all that.
Right. Yeah.
But just today I went for a 5 miler and I got a comment and it said, I heard your podcast on Road to the Olympic Trials and it was super inspiring. I'm a 14-year-old who runs cross country and track. Keep it up, my man. And I was whoa. That's pretty remarkable. And it's the type of thing that you would almost not even dare to wish that you could have an impact. So to throw that out there, I do think it's a culmination. My ability to speak about these things is a culmination of 20 years of thinking about them. And I'm not done yet. But at the same time, like, you know, I'm 38 and a half. And as much as I would like to believe that this can go on forever, I'm not about to, like, I don't even have to worry about it going on forever, because I'm going to continue to work on my running, and then like the body will take care of the rest of it. But I know that's not the same as being, you know, like 26 and being like, I have 2 more cycles of this. So,
Well, I mean, to quote Ricky Bobby in Talladega Nights, you know, given your high level of income and advances in modern science, you could easily live to be 200-300 years old. So you might be hitting your prime.
Okay,
you know?
Thank you. Now, better perspective.
Thank you. No, I think that, I mean, what you've illustrated is really powerful. I mean, you've had missing by 2 seconds has taken a lot of folks who don't know you and maybe didn't know anything about you, but they have identified with you in a meaningful way. And that way has been entirely positive from what I can tell.
Yeah.
And these, you know, you've got 14-year-old kids and people who don't know you who are stepping out of their comfort zone and taking a, you know, slice of time out of their limited mortality to just tell you that what you did meant something to them. And that is going to mean something to them and empower them in turn. I wonder, Peter, like, if you had run 3 seconds faster, you might be happier with the result. And I certainly would never suggest that you would ever want to make the trade. But given what you shared with me today and like what clearly is important to you, is there a chance that you look back, you know, in years' time and genuinely, I mean, without having sort of rationalized it, genuinely actually think that you did more for yourself in the sport having missed by 2 seconds than made it, or no?
I think it's definitely possible. I'm still trying to almost process that reality. And I've had close friends that I trust, like, say similar things to me. It's like this little bubble that I got on the outside of. I'll say I got reaction. I've had some nice notes from competitors of mine who are qualifiers, and one guy who's a badass runner posted like, hey, definitely feel for Bromka. We all know that, like, given different circumstances, we could find ourselves on the outside, which I was like, man, you ran 2:17:30. Like, I think of you as pretty well within the ballpark, but, you know, we know that there's a lot of factors involved in success. And, you know, it was the fastest I've ever run, and it wasn't a perfect day. I don't look at it by any means and think like, oh, I could never run faster. So I'd have to figure that. But I thought that was getting appreciation from people like that is really meaningful. And then, yeah, friends who are able to see the sport from slightly outside and say like, this is, again, I think the thing I said is it's my working hypothesis, which is that if someone breaks 2:19, we ascribe a, like, you're a freak, I guess you could just do it. And then if you miss, I think inherent in the miss is Bromka really must have tried hard, because he wouldn't have missed by 2 seconds if he wasn't, like, willy-nilly. And so I'm like, no. I hope it's very clear that I was trying very, very hard. But
I think that's right, Peter. I mean, I think that we live in a world that is so busy and over inundated that it's really important for our minds to make a lot of things black and white so that we can just kind of navigate the world and move on.
Yeah.
And I think what you've done right from the moment you responded and posted on Instagram and sort of poked fun at yourself and kind of Eminem'd your way through the reaction is you really sort of lived in the gray in a way that was really identifiable for folks in the last week. And you've been able to on one hand psychologically hold the disappointment and the physical pain that you had to go through to get there, with the elation of improving and the elation of inspiring others, and also still feeling like I think the way that you're comfortable vocalizing with a degree of humility is I wonder if there's a trait in there that actually enables you to have become the runner you've become. I wonder if there's something about that ability to hold the duality of it. Yeah, certainly the positivity, but the ability to acknowledge and be comfortable saying, I can feel two very conflicting emotions quite frequently in succession, seemingly at the same time, and still take that, analyze it rationally, and use that to empower myself. Is that
Yeah.
something you see in other areas of your world outside of running?
Yeah, I mean, I mean, my family is often like, we don't need Peter to be more positive. Like, yeah, great. You know, some of us are dealing with like, you know, sadness over here. Peter, not so much. And I'm like, so I've always been super fortunate to be like wired as a positive person. And then I do think that has made marathoning easier for me, because like marathoning will just break you psychologically, and make you feel really sorry for yourself. Like it's part and parcel with the event, is that you'll get to a point where you are very, very unhappy, and then you have to hover there for an extended period of time. Like being able to finish an 800 or a 1500 is super, super hard, and is almost like a different mindset of like just going full adrenaline and rage. I mean, I've often run well at Boston when it's kind of hot, and people have been like, you must be a really good hot weather runner. And I'm like, well, I don't know, not particularly. It sort of begins with me being fairly self-aware of how my body feels and knowing how to like walk that line without overstepping. Boston was like soupy and hot this year, and a lot of people were like, that was messed up. And so I came out of this year going like, it's not about like, it is like a threshold, and if you pop that threshold, like you're in real trouble. But if you come like right up against it and you stay there and stay there and stay there, you can like squeak out a lot of seconds.
I mean, that's a metaphor for running in general. You're always kind of trying to teeter over this peak with injury, with mileage, with understanding. And if you go over, it's a very steep slope. But if you can stay right there, the peak can.
Yeah. So then psychologically, physically, I've been able to do that. And psychologically, I'm able to, I mean, Boston, I do well because I love the course. And so I like can mentally find checkpoints that I'm like in love with the course and all of the checkpoints along it. So like when I'm struggling, I get, up to 21, and then I get to 22, I go by BC, I get a lift from the crowd. Both my parents went to BC. And so I'm like, it's like being home a little bit. And then then you go to this corner. Like, so I've broken it down mentally, and that allows me to stay. That's how I choose to stay in a positive mental mind frame. When you're like, I have a buddy standing at 23 and he goes, Bromka, 5K to freedom. And you're like, oh, screw you. Like, this is so hard. This is horrible. And it was almost him saying that pointed out, like, he knew how horrible it was. But so, yeah, I think that's, and I think Patrick, my close training partner, is the same. He's not nearly as effusive. He doesn't post online a lot. He's a man of far fewer words, but like shit goes down and he's just like, okay, we'll adjust. And sounds good.
Yeah, that's a fascinating conversation that we should have, which is, I think, really indicative. There's a much deeper topic here, which is the sense in which, I mean, as you sort of put it yourself, you kind of hit the cortical lottery relative to other folks in terms of your baseline of happiness, and that can make you much more resilient, and that's an asset as a marathoner. And we often talk about the mental parts of the game. I think it's often discussed, the mental elements of running, training, really doing anything, as purely a matter of will, as if will is just a matter of volition and choice. And a lot of that is based on actually much more biological, physiological characteristics and circumstances that you can't simply just will yourself to. You can choose how you're going to deal with your emotions if you get good at it. But there's an element, just like having a higher natural VO2 max, born with either, a trait-based thing like grittiness or resiliency, or sort of a greater proclivity for happiness, or the ability to bounce back. We should talk more about that at some other point, because I think that'd be a really interesting conversation or piece to write.
I mean, I don't want to leave this, although I'm exceedingly thankful. I still don't think I'm tough enough, just like flat out.
But that in and of itself right there may be a useful driver for you, that it gets you to perform in a way that others who do think they're plenty tough don't have. Yeah. So this idea that there's like, I can get better at this, and I can see what better would do for me, and would look for, like, that can drive you to strive in a way where others who are like, I'm toughing it out, I'm just not good enough, might throw in the towel.
I'm not a golfer, but Patrick is a golfer. And so we often use the phrase, like, if you have that club, like, swing it. I think in a marathon and in a training cycle, you use different clubs, and then in different events. Like the 5K is very meaning. Jen Ryan said it recently in an interview. Like she was able to hurt for 14 minutes, and that was like a thing where she was technically a Olympic marathoner. Blah, but she's like, I could do it, but it wasn't what I loved. And so I have friends who are like really intense competitors in that final, like if it comes down to a lap, like they're gonna kill themselves to beat you. And so that's where, I like the marathon, because I can get like, I can spend over 2 hours rising into a margin that's like super great. And then I've often felt like I kind of like backed my way in, because I've often positive split. I've often I ran my slowest mile at CIM as the 26th mile, and I've, it's my reality that I have to deal with, because I've done that oftentimes, and a lot of times no one's been the wiser. I ran 2:23 at Boston this year, and everyone's like, "Congratulations, you're the man!" Da 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 da. All this congratulations. And then I have friends who ran Boston. They were like, "I'm really disappointed in myself. I slowed down those final 3 miles." And I was like, "Hold on." And I screenshot my final 3 miles, and I sent it to them. I'm like, "I want you to see how slowly I ran relative pace the final 3 miles." It took like the last 3 miles of Boston are very, very hard. And so it's only to say, like, I put myself, this is getting in like analyzing the race, I put myself in a position where I needed to execute in the final, like 2,000 meters. And I don't know if I was fully seasoned at how to do that, because I have friends who I think if I could have placed them on earth in my shoes with 2K to go, I'd be like, that guy's going to nail it every time. Like he's willing to bury himself. And so, but again, a lot of those guys can't get to 2,000. They can't.
I was going to say, are those guys even going to be in your shoes with,
There's like a million ways that it can go sideways. So like, I know it's not that simple. I'm just sort of theoretically, I have friends, and those totally meaningfully, I try to channel them. I try to channel like, what would he do in this moment? He would get angry that little kid was smiling at him the wrong way, and he would like, that dog is disrespecting me. I gotta go. Like it's crazy stuff, but it's sports psychology. And I am generally, I was too easy on myself. Like, I'll just say it. Like I was too like, you got this, you're doing well, you're running fast. And I, in some ways, maybe set myself up to execute a race that it wasn't my perfect way to execute. So, whereas Patrick, even like I said to Patrick, like, I think you would have gotten it. Like, I think on multiple occasions, I've beaten Patrick. I mean, I don't want to beat this case study, but if I beat Patrick, I typically beat him by like a minute. And when he beats me, he's able to beat me by like under 30 seconds, and that's like this, it's a different type of grit. It's like when he beat me 2 years ago at CIM, he's like, I mean, he also beat me last year at CIM by 2 minutes, but that was like he was in an insane shape. But like 2 years ago, I remember he passed me with 3 miles to go, and he's like, every place counts. And I'm like, every place counts. Like we're running out of our minds. I don't know any of these dudes. I'm super tired. My legs have gone to total concrete. But he's able to be like, it's very simple. It's very matter of fact. It's like every place counts, and he's tracking down dudes. He doesn't care who they are. He's just like going. And so he's the person. He and other people are the mindset I go to. So I just think there's different mindsets at different moments in sports.
Yeah, no, the psychology of the final kick is a really interesting moment in running that we should certainly talk about in greater detail. I want to ask you 2 final questions here as we wrap, because we've been rolling for a while. First one, this may be unearthing a can of worms.
Oh.
What have you learned since the experience?
I've learned meaningfully, like just how much my story meant to a lot more people than I ever imagined it meant to. And so again, I've learned, first and foremost, that working hypothesis that I think if I had broken it, people might have assumed I was like somehow another. And
he's probably been hooked up to weird treadmills at the Nike headquarters doing strange VO2 max stuff. That can't happen to me. He's not one of us.
Like I could never do that. And I'm like, no. Like this is really just me being here. And so that's been really, it's hard because I wish I could have learned that lesson while also qualifying. I'm like, damn. And so that's, been the thing. And then I think that the like getting, I feel like I've been pretty out there with my story, right? I've posted a lot, but I still know that this has been a moment where more people have learned about my story, and had people be like, whoa. And so it makes me realize, like, there's maybe, it's not that I have a goal to get my story. I don't have any metrics or money to be made, but it's more like, how do you, like, there's more there. Just like, I guess, keep going. And to be honest, I don't know what the future holds in terms of, it's always a letdown after a marathon. Like, there's this emotional and physical letdown, something you've been building towards. And in many ways, I've been building towards this for 2 years. And so I'm like, oh dear, whoa, careful. Like, you have to, like, get ready to catch yourself, because it's just, you're now pulling out that you're pulling out the undergirding that's built, like how you've structured your life for 2 years.
A lot of
like
habits that are suddenly being untangled. Yeah.
Yeah. And you're like, oh, what does that mean? I mean, you could name any weekend or any month for over the last 2 years, and I could tell you where I was. Like, if I looked on a calendar, I'd be like, this is the mindset I was at and where I was building towards this goal. So, like, obviously that'll get you really far. At the time, it just felt like the natural thing to do, because I was trying to keep up with my friends and because I was trying to get after this goal. And so and we've talked about the trials. Like, I have a buddy who does photography and storytelling, and we're throwing back and forth ideas about, like, how to shoot Atlanta, like how to make. And I was like, I wonder if you could do a thing where you ask people the day after, like, so what's next, and, like, what do you take from yesterday forward? Because I think, like we said, there's been this tsunami of people qualifying for the trials, and at the same time, it's a real event. It's not make believe, but, like, it's a hobby goal that's come out of
97 to 98% of the folks in that race are running it as the culmination of their season, as opposed to what the race is intended to be for, which is a trial for something in the future.
Exactly. And so I'll be curious to know, I mean, I very well might look at others and say, like, what's meaningful to you next? Maybe I'll borrow that. I think you can borrow people's goals and say, like, and I've been checking in with people who want to run 100Ks next and people who want to run 5Ks, and I'm like, okay, interesting. Like, think about that. So I do think it's like, the thing I've learned is that I am in a moment of looking back a little bit and being like, whoa, you can make it far in 2 years.
Yeah, no, I think you're at a critical point in what could be a true transformative learning journey, right? This idea of running 2 seconds slower than a 2-year goal is, quite frankly, a disorienting dilemma, and can be really useful in terms of empowering. So I'm really excited to see what you decide to do or not do as a result of that, and sort of continue to chronicle the journey. Because I think, while in many ways folks are interested in it as a capstone to the journey that's happened, I think the more interesting part is what comes of this and what we can take from your experience there. And so I guess I'll leave you with this one question. I know you said you're 38, you're kind of looking in the mirror. Yeah, it's true that, Lagat is how old, and Kipchoge's been 34 for the past 60 years. So we don't know how old that guy's been. I don't know if you saw that recent cover on Track and Field News that's been resurfacing with him beating El Garouge of Bekele in the 5K. And he looks the same. I mean, it was 20 years ago. The guy looks the same. So the question that I'll leave you with here is, next time trials comes around, you're 42 years old. You've got growing work and family and life responsibility. And let's say, because of the result of great writing by folks like yourself and others, USATF says, okay, the B standard is 221.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of starts and ends with my teammates. That's where I'm able to tap into this, like, whole window of ability that I really can't find. I sometimes feel like there's a letdown for people who maybe are out there and don't have teammates. But for instance, I've had such success with teammates that, again, I don't like talking trash about decisions people make, but I'm like, there are definitely American individual distance athletes who train on their own. And I'm like, full stop. What makes you think you can train on your own? Kipchoge doesn't train on his own. From what I've experienced, I can't do any of this on my own. We're at such far ends of the spectrum. No, people have to make life decisions and all sorts of things. But, if this is it feels like maybe a backup answer, but it is like, my buddies who golf are still going to be golfing in 3 years. They're like, for sure. My buddies who ride are going to be riding in 3 years. So I'm like, what I'm going to be doing from a running perspective, I'll still be running for years and years to come, but to train at this level, it'll only be, for instance, like we don't always go back to Boston every year, because although we could place decently well, like we pour so much into our Bostons, and we won the team title this year, that it takes like a year of focus. And it obviously is a good run, but then you have to look yourself in the mirror and be like, I can't just rinse and repeat this goal for next year and expect to be super fired up to get up at 5 a.m. So it's like the shifting. I won't be shocked, and if I am, and I won't be shocked at all if I'm not. I will say, like, the answer to what fires me up is it's just a constant. It's a constant evolving question for myself. People have been like, "You're going to kill the trails," and I'm like, if my heart becomes inspired by the trails,
Sure.
and it's nothing negative about the trails. It's just like, what does it mean to love something? I love the marathon so intensely at this point that I was joking with some buddies. I'm like, it'd be super fun to go to these other races around the country and just like rip. Like my family in-laws are in Newport, Rhode Island, and I'm like, what would it mean to like bound around the roads I train on? They're like, yeah, dude, but you'd have to train at this level and then go take it and run alone in Newport. And I'm like, you're right. This is not a transferable.
You're very much aware of being a product of the environment that you're also co-creating.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm happy to give so much to my teammates because they give it back to me, 2, 3, 4, tenfold. And what's cool is like, yeah, you say like, could I do it in 3 years? And like, we got an email from a young guy who ran 2:20 or 2:22 at CIM, and he's in the area, and he's like, hey, what would it mean to train with you guys? And I'm like, I can see us still having like a critical mass, because I'm glossing over, like, I have really good friends who I've posted about this, like, who were broken and they didn't get to join me at CIM. Like I said to them, I texted them like, I for a year pictured lining up with you tomorrow, and you're not going to be there, and that breaks my heart a little bit. And I hope I'm running in your honor, but I know that doesn't mean that I'm running in your honor. It doesn't make it any easier, because like you wish you could be there. So like I would also say I like knock on wood and really appreciating for the starting lines that have been healthy at.
No doubt. Well, Peter, I know we can find you all your writing, peterbromka.com. Everyone here follows you. We have Messi, we have Lydiard, we have Bolt, we've got Bromka at Bromka. Thank you so much for joining today. I know that I certainly really enjoyed this conversation. Hopefully many more. It sounds like we've got some pieces to co-write together as well. And I know on behalf of the listeners who are going to be joining us, a little selfish plug here for Endeavorun this summer. I know you and I have talked about you maybe join us out there in Eugene. That's something that's on your radar as well.
Exciting.
So we'll have to talk about that.
Cool.
And thanks for joining, man, but we'll catch you soon.
Thank you.